The call came at 3:17 a.m. Some truths only arrive in the dark, when the world is stripped of its daytime courtesies. The phone didn't ring with the cheerful tone I'd assigned to my family. It vibrated with the harsh, anonymous buzz of an unknown number. I knew, even before I answered, that it was them. They only ever called from blocked numbers when they were about to ask for something they knew they shouldn't. I let it vibrate 3 more times on the nightstand, the sound a frantic insect against the wood. My leg ached, a deep, phantom throb that always surfaced in the quiet hours before dawn. It was a souvenir from my last tour in the army, a constant reminder of a day when the world had come apart in dust and fire. I swung my good leg over the side of the bed, the floorboards cold under my foot. Finally, I picked up the phone. "Kate," my father's voice said, without preamble. No hello, no sorry to call so late. Just my name, spoken like a command. I didn't answer. I listened to the thin, staticky silence between us, the sound of a debt being called in. "Kate, we need your help," he said, his voice tight with a manufactured urgency I knew all too well. "There's been an accident." I pictured him in their immaculate, cream-colored living room, pacing the Persian rug he was so proud of. My mother would be beside him, wringing her hands, her face a mask of perfectly sculpted concern. They were a performance piece, my parents. "Mark was in a car accident," he continued, referring to my new brother-in-law. "It's bad, Kate. He hit someone." A pause, heavy with unspoken details. "He'd been drinking." Of course he had. Mark, my sister Ashley's charming, feckless husband, ran on a fuel of cheap charisma and expensive bourbon. I had watched him at their wedding, just 6 weeks earlier, his smile a little too wide, his hand always holding a sweating glass. "They're talking about serious charges," my father's voice crackled. "We need a lawyer, a top-tier one, not some public defender. This has to be managed correctly. The optics of this, you understand." I understood the optics. I understood that for my parents, every crisis was a public relations problem first, and a human problem second. The person Mark had hit was a nameless, faceless obstacle to their carefully curated image. "We need money for the retainer, for bail, to handle this quietly." He took a breath, the sound of a man steeling himself to state the price. "The lawyer wants $75,000 up front, and we'll need more for collateral damages." I remained silent. The hum of my refrigerator suddenly seemed deafening. The number he'd named wasn't random. It was surgical. "We just spent everything on the wedding, Kate," he said, the first hint of accusation creeping into his tone. $50,000 gone, to give your sister a proper start. You know that. Oh, I knew. I had the canceled check from my own gift to prove it, a modest 4-figure sum that had felt like a sacrifice to me and had been received like a coupon by them. Then came the line I had been waiting for my entire life, the phrase that had defined my role in our family's ecosystem. "You're the strong one, Kate. You always figure it out. We know you have the money from your payout. It's just sitting there." My payout. The money the United States Army had given me when they decided a crushed tibia and a web of nerve damage meant I could no longer serve my country. It wasn't a lottery win. It was compensation. It was the value they had placed on the future I had lost, on the career that had been my entire identity, on the leg that would never again carry me up a mountain without screaming in protest. To them, it was a savings account. To me, it was scar tissue converted to currency. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't scream at him that he had no right. I felt a strange and sudden calm settle over me, a cold clarity that pushed the pain in my leg into the background. It was the same feeling I'd had in the moments after the IED went off, the world slowing down, details becoming sharp and hyper-focused. The dust motes dancing in the sliver of moonlight from my window, the precise pattern of the grain on my nightstand. the cold, smooth glass of the phone against my ear. "Kate, are you there?" my father pressed, his voice fraying with impatience. "We don't have time for this." "I heard you," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used to use on the radio to confirm coordinates for an artillery strike. Precise. Final. "So you'll make the transfer in the morning?" he asked, relief flooding his voice. He'd mistaken my composure for compliance. They always did. I didn't answer. I let the question hang in the air, a testament to his audacity. Then I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I pressed the red icon on the screen and placed the device back on the nightstand with deliberate care. The vibration was gone. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was the silence of a decision being made, not a decision for revenge. That was too emotional, too messy. This was a decision for correction, a logistical problem that required a logistical solution. They had designated me the strong one. They had no idea what that truly meant. The phrase, "You're the strong one," echoed in the quiet of my apartment, triggering a cascade of memories, each one a small, polished stone of resentment I had carried for years. It pulled me back 6 weeks, to a table laden with food I couldn't taste. It was the family dinner to celebrate Ashley's engagement, held at my parents' house. The air was thick with the scent of roasted chicken and self-congratulation. My sister, Ashley, was glowing. She was the golden child, the artist, the one who felt things so deeply the rest of us had to cushion her from the world. Her fiancé, Mark, sat beside her, his arm draped possessively around her chair, a portrait of smug satisfaction. I sat opposite them, my leg propped stiffly on a spare chair, a polite smile fixed on my face. I was home on extended medical leave, navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the VA, a world of paperwork and endless appointments that felt more foreign than any country I'd ever been deployed to. My mother, a woman who weaponized concern, fussed over Ashley. "Are you sure about the caterer, darling? You know what happened at the Henderson girls' wedding. And the lighting. We have to get the lighting just right for the photos." Then she turned to me, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan. "Kate, did you get that new form filled out for your physical therapy? You can't let that paperwork slide." She said it with the same tone she'd used to remind someone to take out the trash. My recovery was a chore on her mental to-do list. Ashley's wedding was a masterpiece in progress. That's when my father cleared his throat, tapping his wineglass with a knife. "We have an announcement," he said, beaming. "Your mother and I have been thinking about what we can do to give Ashley and Mark the best possible start in their new life together." He looked at Ashley, his face soft with an adoration I had never seen directed at me. A wedding is more than just a party. It's a statement. It sets the tone for your future. It's an investment in your happiness. He slid a pale blue envelope across the table. Ashley opened it with a theatrical gasp. Inside was a check. $50,000, she breathed, her eyes welling with practiced tears. "Oh, Daddy, Mommy, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, sweetheart," my mother said, reaching across to pat her hand. "You deserve it. Mark is still building his business. You shouldn't have to start your marriage worrying about money." I felt a familiar, dull ache begin behind my ribs. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the weary recognition of a pattern as old as I was. I thought back to when I was 19, preparing for my first deployment. My beat-up Civic had finally died, and I needed a reliable car to get to and from the base, 3 hours away. I'd asked for help, a $5,000 loan. My father had sat me down in his study, the room smelling of leather and condescension. "We'll help you, of course, Kate," he'd said, pulling a folder from his desk drawer. But this is a learning opportunity. He produced a formal loan document he had drafted himself. It outlined a payment schedule complete with a 7% interest rate. "This will teach you responsibility," he'd explained, his face serious. "You're a soldier now. You need to understand how the world works. Nothing is free." I signed the papers. I paid back every cent, with interest, from my meager private's salary. I ate ramen noodles for months to do it. 2 years later, on Ashley's 16th birthday, they presented her with a brand new convertible, a giant red bow on the hood. When I'd quietly pointed out the disparity, my mother had sighed. "Oh, Kate, don't be like that. It's different. Ashley is delicate. You're tough. You can handle things." "You're the strong one." Back at the celebratory dinner, as Ashley and Mark basked in the glow of their windfall, my father, finally, turned his attention to me. "So, Kate," he said, his tone shifting from benevolent benefactor to practical manager, "what's the final word on your discharge? They're giving you a medical retirement, right? There's a payout with that, isn't there?" It wasn't a question of concern for my well-being. It was an inventory. He was assessing my assets. I looked at the smiling faces around the table, my radiant sister, my proud mother, my calculating father, and I felt like a foreigner at my own family's table. I was their utility, their soldier, their fail-safe. The strong one who could be counted on to bear any burden, ask for nothing, and require no softness in return. My strength wasn't a quality they admired. It was a resource they intended to exploit. I raised my glass of water. "Congratulations, Ashley. I hope it's everything you've ever wanted." My voice was even. My smile was perfect. And inside, something cold and hard began to crystallize. Back in my kitchen, the first pale light of dawn was filtering through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor. The shock of my father's call had worn off, replaced by a chilling sense of inevitability. This wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a lifetime of transactions disguised as relationships. The phone buzzed again. This time the screen lit up with Ashley's name. I let it go to voicemail, listening as her recorded voice, bubbly and carefree, asked me to leave a message. A few seconds later, the notification for a new voicemail appeared. I didn't listen to it. I knew what it would be. Then came a barrage of texts. "Kate, pick up the phone. It's an emergency. Mom told me you hung up on Dad. How could you? This is about my life, Kate. My husband." I set the phone face down on the counter. The silence was more powerful than any argument I could make. An hour later, Ashley called again. This time, I answered. I held the phone slightly away from my ear, bracing myself. "Finally!" she shrieked, her voice a razor blade of panic and indignation. "Do you have any idea what we're going through? Mark is in a holding cell. A holding cell, Kate. He's scared. I'm scared." "What do you want, Ashley?" I asked, my tone flat. "What do I want?" she sputtered, incredulous. "I want you to help us. I want you to do what Dad asked. You have the money. You're just sitting on it. What else are you even going to use it for?" The casual cruelty of that question landed like a physical blow. What else are you even going to use it for? As if my future, the one I had to rebuild from scratch, was a triviality. As if the security that money represented was a luxury I didn't need. "My life is falling apart," she sobbed, the tears sounding genuine this time, but they were tears for herself, for her ruined image, her tarnished fairy tale. There was no mention of the person Mark had put in the hospital. No flicker of remorse for her husband's actions, only fear for her own social standing. "Dad said you'd be difficult," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. The tears were gone, replaced by resentment. "He said you've gotten cold. Ever since you got back, he said we might have to convince you. He knows all about your investments, you know. He helped you set up that initial portfolio, remember? He still gets the statements." The air left my lungs. It was one thing to be taken for granted. It was another to be spied on. My father, the man who lectured me on financial responsibility, had been monitoring my accounts. They hadn't just assumed I had the money. They had been tracking it. They had watched my disability payout arrive, watched me invest it for my future, and had seen it not as my lifeline, but as their safety net. That was the moment the pattern became undeniable. It wasn't just about being the strong one. It was about being the designated resource. The time they'd borrowed my car for a month when I was on a training exercise, only to return it with a new dent and an empty gas tank, dismissing my frustration with a breezy, "Oh, you can get it fixed. You're so good at that stuff." The way I was the default person to call to fix a leaky faucet, assemble furniture, or troubleshoot their Wi-Fi, always on my short periods of leave, because my time was less valuable than theirs. I was their human multi-tool. "Kate, are you listening to me?" Ashley demanded. "This is not the time to be selfish. Family helps family. It's what we do." Family helps family. The words were hollow, a slogan from a greeting card they didn't believe in. They didn't want a sister. They wanted a bank. "I have to go, Ashley," I said. "No, you don't. You can't just—" I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen as the sun rose higher, the stripes of light crawling up the walls. The sense of betrayal was so profound it was almost physical, a cold weight in my chest. I had been a fool. I had mistaken their consistent exploitation for a dysfunctional kind of love. But it wasn't love. It was just utility. And my utility was about to expire. I sank onto a kitchen chair, my leg throbbing in time with the frantic beating of my heart. The four walls of my small, neat apartment suddenly felt like they were closing in. This was my sanctuary, the one place I had complete control. Everything had its place. The books on the shelves were arranged by subject and author. The kitchen counters were clear, gleaming under the recessed lights. It was a sterile, orderly world I had built to keep the chaos at bay. Now, the chaos was inside, a storm of humiliation and rage. I looked at my phone, at the glowing screen displaying my bank balance. The number looked obscene. It was the price of my body's failure, the sum of my lost future. It was supposed to be the foundation for a new life, a small house, somewhere quiet, a consulting business where I could use my logistic skills in the civilian world. Security, the one thing I craved above all else. And they thought they could just claim it, like it was a forgotten inheritance. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. For the first time since I'd been wounded, I felt truly broken, not by the explosion, not by the pain, but by the casual, breathtaking cruelty of my own family. I was completely and utterly alone. A sharp, decisive knock echoed from my front door, not the frantic banging of a family in crisis, but something steady and calm. I ignored it. It came again, 3 measured raps. I pushed myself up, my joints stiff, and limped to the door, peering through the peephole. It was David, my physical therapist. He was standing in the hallway, holding a small canvas bag. He was a man in his late 60s, a Marine Corps veteran from a different war, with kind eyes and a quiet understanding of pain. He didn't treat me like a collection of broken parts. He treated me like a person. I opened the door. "Morning, Kate," he said, his gaze taking in my disheveled state. He didn't comment on it. "Promised I'd drop these off." He held up the bag. "New set of resistance bands, the heavy-duty ones. Figured you were ready." "Thanks," I mumbled, taking the bag. The canvas was rough against my skin. He didn't leave. He just stood there, his presence calm and solid. "Rough night at the office?" he asked gently. a phrase we used to cover everything from a bad pain day to a nightmare. A short, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You could say that." He nodded slowly. "I'm making a tea run. You want one?" I hesitated. My instinct was to refuse, to retreat back into my fortress of solitude, but something in his steady, non-judgmental gaze made me pause. "Yeah," I heard myself say. "Okay." He returned 10 minutes later with 2 steaming cups. He followed me into my kitchen and sat at the small table, placing a cup in front of me. He didn't pry. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat with me in silence, the steam from the tea swirling between us. The simple act of companionship, of someone showing up with no agenda, was so foreign it almost brought me to tears. And then the story started to spill out of me. Not the whole messy history, but a clipped professional summary. Family emergency, financial request, substantial amount. For a legal issue. He listened, his expression unchanging. He didn't offer platitudes or easy advice. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his tea. "Family can be a heavy ruck to carry," he said quietly. Then he looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. "I don't have much. My pension barely covers the mortgage. But my brother-in-law is a lawyer. Does estate planning, contract law. Not a flashy downtown guy, but he's honest. He's a good man. Does free first consults for vets. No strings." He pulled out a worn leather wallet and retrieved a business card. He slid it across the table. "Name's Paul. Tell him David sent you." I looked at the card, then at David. This man, who had so little, was offering me the most valuable thing he had. A connection, a resource, help without a price tag. His quiet, unconditional support was a lifeline thrown into the storm. It was everything my family was supposed to be and never was. The contrast was a physical shock, a jolt that cleared the fog of despair. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice thick. "Don't thank me," he said, standing up. "Just be ready for those new bands on Friday. We're working on balance." He left. I sat at the table, holding the small, stiff rectangle of cardboard. Paul Yasinski, attorney at law. It felt heavier than a business card. It felt like a weapon. The moment of clarity I'd had on the phone with my father returned, but this time it wasn't just cold. It was sharp. The lawyer's office was in a modest 2-story brick building in a suburb I'd never been to. It was a world away from the gleaming glass towers downtown where my family's preferred lawyers operated. The waiting room was clean but dated, with framed prints of local landscapes on the walls. Paul Yasinski was exactly as David had described him, a man in his 50s with a kind, tired face and a firm handshake. He wore a rumpled suit and radiated a sense of weary competence. He led me into his office, which was cluttered with neat stacks of files and law books. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, placing my satchel on the floor beside me. "David said you needed to talk," he began, leaning back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. "He said it was a family matter." "Yes," I said. I took a breath and laid it all out, just as I had for David, but this time with more detail. The military background, the injury, the payout, the $50,000 wedding gift for my sister, the late-night call about Mark's DUI accident, the specific financial demand, Ashley's call, and the revelation that my father was monitoring my financial statements. I spoke in the clipped, factual manner I'd learned in the military, reporting an incident, sticking to the observable data. Paul listened, without interruption, his hands steepled under his chin. He didn't react with shock or sympathy. He just absorbed the information. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. "First things first. Did you ever at any point sign any document granting either of your parents power of attorney?" "No." "Are any of your bank accounts, investment accounts, or property held jointly with them?" No. Everything is in my name only. Did they co-sign on any part of your disability claim or the subsequent payout from the Department of Defense or the VA? No. It was all handled through my command and the VA's legal advisors. He made a few notes. Good, he said. Legally, your position is ironclad. You have zero obligation to give them a single cent. That money is yours and yours alone. Their request is morally questionable, but it has no legal weight. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. However, he continued, holding my gaze, that doesn't mean they'll stop. People like this, they don't respond to no. They see it as a negotiation. He leaned forward. So, we need to build a firewall, and we need to document everything. From this moment forward, I want you to keep a log. A simple notebook is fine. Every call, every text, every email, every voicemail. Log the date, the time, who it was from, and a direct quote or a summary of what was said. Be meticulous. He paused. You mentioned they gave you a loan for a car years ago, with a written agreement. Yes. Do you still have that document? I was taken aback by the question. I think so. In a file box somewhere. Find it, he said. Patterns are important. They establish intent. He then gave me a list of instructions, as clear and concise as a mission briefing. Contact my financial institution and add new security protocols to my accounts. Start looking into moving the bulk of the funds to an entirely different bank under a new account number. And most importantly, cease direct verbal communication. Let it all go to voicemail and text, he advised. It creates a record. A written record is your best defense. I left his office an hour later feeling different. The helpless anger was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim reacting to a crisis. I was an operator with a mission. That afternoon I went to work. I drove to a local office supply store and bought a black hardcover notebook and a pack of fine-tipped pens. Back in my apartment, I started the log. I transcribed the texts from Ashley, noting the timestamps. I listened to her voicemail, my jaw tight, and wrote down her panicked, entitled words verbatim. Then, I turned my attention to the accident. Using my laptop, I accessed the public records portal for the county sheriff's department. I found the initial incident report for Mark's crash. It was worse than I imagined. He hadn't just hit someone. He'd run a red light at high speed and T-boned a smaller sedan, sending it spinning into a utility pole. The other driver, a 34-year-old woman, had to be cut from the wreckage and was listed in critical condition at the university hospital. Her 2 young children had been in the back seat, strapped into car seats. They were miraculously unharmed, but had witnessed the entire thing. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a PR nightmare. This was a catastrophic, life-altering event for a family that had done nothing wrong. My family's complete omission of these details, their focus on their own inconvenience, was obscene. I kept digging. A quick search of court records under Mark's full name brought up 2 prior convictions for driving under the influence in another state, both from his early 20s. My parents and Ashley had presented him as a rising entrepreneur with a bright future. They'd conveniently forgotten to mention he was a repeat offender. I saved a PDF of the accident report. I screenshotted the court records. I printed everything and placed it in a new manila folder. On the tab, I wrote, Project Accountability. The cold clarity was back, harder and sharper than ever. My plan was no longer just about protecting myself. It was about ensuring that the scales of justice, which my family was so desperate to tip with their money and influence, were allowed to find their own balance. And I would be the one to make sure of it. My apartment, once a quiet space for healing, transformed into an operations center. My military training, long dormant, kicked back in. Logistics, strategy, information management, These were the skills that had defined my career. Now I was deploying them in a different kind of war, a war fought with paperwork and passwords instead of bullets and radios. Following Paul's instructions, I spent the next day on the phone with my bank. I changed all my passwords, instituted two-factor authentication, and added a verbal password for any high-value transactions. The bank representative was helpful, her professional calm a soothing balm. But that was just a temporary measure, a delaying action. The real mission was to move the asset to a secure location. Paul had recommended setting up a living trust and opening new accounts under its name at a completely different financial institution. A trust, he explained, would be a formidable legal shield, making the funds significantly harder for anyone to access or even contest in a civil suit. It was building a fortress wall, brick by legal brick. The paperwork was immense, but I tackled it with the methodical focus of a soldier disassembling and cleaning their rifle. Every line was read, every box checked. I was in my element. This was controllable. This was a world of rules and procedures, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotional landscape of my family. While the trust was being established, I implemented the communication strategy. I stopped answering their calls. My phone would buzz with my father's blocked number or Ashley's increasingly frantic name, and I would watch it, my heart rate steady, until it fell silent. Each unanswered call felt like a small reclamation of power. The voicemails they left became a fascinating study in escalating manipulation. First came the pleading, "Kate, please, just call us back. We can talk this through." Then came the guilt. "Your mother is a wreck. She can't eat. She can't sleep. You're tearing this family apart." Then the anger. "Who do you think you are? After everything we've done for you, this is the thanks we get? You are a deeply selfish person, Catherine." I saved every single one, labeling the audio files by date and time. They were evidence, data points confirming my hypothesis. Finally, after 2 days of silence on my end, I sent a single, calculated text message to my father. It was the first and only communication I initiated. "I am assessing the situation and will advise on my course of action in due time." I used the formal, slightly sterile language of a military report on purpose. It was a signal. It told them I was not operating on an emotional level. I was not their hysterical daughter or their difficult sister. I was an independent entity, analyzing a problem. It created a chasm of distance they could not cross. The response was immediate, a call from my father, which I ignored. A text from Ashley. "What does that even mean? This isn't one of your army games, Kate." But it was a game in a way. A game they had started, with rules they had made up to benefit themselves. I was just finally learning how to play. My true objective, however, was taking shape on a different front. My plan was never about hoarding my money or simply denying them. That felt passive, incomplete. Accountability required action. I contacted a different law firm, one specializing in victim advocacy and personal injury, a firm Paul had recommended as being sharks, but the kind you want on your side. I spoke to a partner at the firm, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. DeLuca. I explained the situation, leaving out the family connection. I was an anonymous benefactor, I told her, who had learned of a tragic DUI accident and wished to help the victim. I authorized her to establish an irrevocable trust. I wired $150,000 into the trust's account, the $75,000 my father had demanded for Mark's lawyer, and another $75,000 for the collateral damages he'd so callously mentioned. The trust's sole purpose, as written into its charter, was to provide for the complete medical care, rehabilitative therapy, lost income, and future financial needs of the victim, the 34-year-old mother, and to establish educational funds for her 2 children. The trust was to be managed by the firm and administered anonymously. The victim would never know where the money came from. It would simply be there when she needed it. Wiring that money felt like lancing a wound. It was not a loss. It was a reallocation. It was taking the funds my family saw as a tool for evading consequences and turning it into a tool for healing them. It was the most right thing I had ever done with money in my life. The number in my own bank account was smaller, but for the first time in a long time I felt truly wealthy. The days that followed were quiet on my end, but I could feel the pressure building on theirs. The silence from my phone was deceptive. It was the quiet eye of a storm. Their initial panic, I surmised, was morphing into genuine desperation. Mark's arraignment was scheduled for the end of the week. The high-powered lawyer they'd consulted would have dropped them the moment his retainer failed to materialize. They would be facing the grim reality of a public defender and a legal system that was not impressed by their social standing. They escalated their tactics. They started showing up at my apartment. I'd installed a simple doorbell camera the week before, another small act of securing my perimeter. Now I watched them on my phone's screen. The first time it was my father, standing on my doormat, his face a thundercloud. He rang the bell, then knocked, the sound sharp and demanding. I sat on my couch watching his image on the screen and did nothing. He stood there for 10 minutes, his posture growing more rigid, before finally turning and storming away. The next day they came together. My father, my mother, and Ashley. It was a full-scale assault. My mother, her face streaked with tears, pleaded with the camera lens. "Kate, darling, please, we can't do this without you. Please just open the door." Ashley was next, her face contorted with rage. "I can't believe you're doing this to me, Kate. To your own sister. You're ruining my life." She pounded on the door, her fists making a hollow thudding sound. My father stood behind them, silent, his arms crossed, a dark, menacing presence. Watching them, I felt a strange detachment. There was no flicker of triumph, no satisfaction. It was like watching surveillance footage of a predictable weather event. This was their pattern. When charm failed, they escalated to emotional blackmail, then to anger. I was simply observing the data, and the data confirmed my assessment. They were not concerned for me. They were not capable of seeing my perspective. They only saw a locked door standing between them and what they wanted. During this siege, my own life continued with a quiet, disciplined rhythm. My sessions with David were the anchor of my week. We were working on balance, both literally and figuratively. He would have me stand on my injured leg on a foam pad, my arms out to the side, my muscles screaming. "Don't fight the wobble," he'd say, his voice calm and steady beside me. "Just adjust. Find your center. Trust the leg. It's stronger than you think." One afternoon, holding the position for a full minute for the first time, sweat beading on my forehead, I felt a shift. The pain was still there, a familiar, dull fire. But beneath it, I could feel the solid strength of the bone that had healed, the muscles that had been painstakingly rebuilt. I could trust it. It would hold me. That physical realization mirrored the emotional one. I could trust my own judgment. I could hold my ground. That evening, after another barrage of angry voicemails and a final, desperate visit from my father, I decided it was time. They had exhausted all their options. The time for assessment was over. The time for advisement had come. I picked up my phone. I didn't call them. I sent another text, this one to all 3 of them in a group message. "I will meet you. The Daily Grind Coffee Shop on Elm Street. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Be there." I set the terms. The time. The location. A neutral, public space. It put them on my timetable, on my turf. They had been trying to storm my fortress. Instead, I was meeting them on the open field. Then I sent 2 more texts, one to my lawyer, Paul, meeting them tomorrow at 10, the other to David, going in. Paul's reply was immediate, stick to the facts. No emotion. You've got this. David's came a minute later, remember to breathe. Center is strong. I turned my phone off for the night. I slept without dreaming, a deep and dreamless sleep, for the first time in weeks. The coffee shop was busy, filled with the morning rush of people grabbing caffeine on their way to work. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sugar. I arrived at 9:55 a.m. and chose a small table in the corner, one that gave me a clear view of the entrance but kept my back to a wall. A tactical position. They arrived together at 10:05 a.m., a deliberate show of making me wait. They looked terrible. My father's face was grim, my mother's was puffy and red-rimmed, and Ashley looked like a ghost, her usual vibrant energy completely extinguished. They descended on the table like vultures. "Catherine, thank God," my father began, his voice a low growl, foregoing any pleasantries. "We're out of time. Mark's hearing is the day after tomorrow. We need you to transfer the money. Now. The lawyer's name is—" I held up a single hand. The gesture was small, but it was absolute. It cut him off mid-sentence. They all stopped and stared at me, surprised by the quiet authority of the movement. I reached into my satchel and pulled out a single, thin manila folder. I placed it on the table between us. The same folder where I'd filed the accident report and Mark's prior convictions. "I'm not giving you any money for Mark's defense," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the din of the coffee shop. A collective intake of breath. Ashley's face crumpled. "Kate, you can't—" "Let me be clear," I continued, my eyes on my father. "I know everything. I have the full accident report. Mark ran a red light, drunk, and nearly killed a woman, a mother of 2. This isn't his first DUI, it's his 3rd. You didn't tell me that part." My father's face went rigid. My mother looked down at her hands. "You didn't call me to ask for help," I went on, my voice remaining level, factual. "You called me to help you cover this up. You weren't worried about the woman in the ICU. You were worried about the optics. You were worried about what the neighbors would say. You were worried about Ashley's new life being tarnished." I looked at my sister. "You didn't cry for her, Ashley. You cried for your wedding china and your social status." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not true." "It is true," I said, my gaze unwavering, "and you know it." I slid the folder toward my father. "You asked me for $150,000, so I took that amount from my account." For a fleeting second, a flicker of desperate hope ignited in their eyes. My father leaned forward slightly. They thought I was caving. They thought my lecture was just a prelude to surrender. "I put it in a trust," I said, letting the words land. "An anonymous trust, managed by a third-party law firm. Its sole purpose is to pay for the complete and total medical care, rehabilitation, and future financial support of the woman Mark hit. It will also fund the college education of her 2 children." Silence. A profound, echoing silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the space around our table. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. My father was the first to speak, his voice a strangled whisper. "You—" "What?" Ashley made a sound, a wounded, guttural noise. "That was our money," she hissed, her eyes wide with fury. "That was for Mark. You gave it away? You did this to us." The us was telling. It never included me. I stood up, my leg feeling strong and steady beneath me. I looked down at the 3 of them, my family, my antagonists, suddenly looking so small and powerless. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen. "You told me the $50,000 for the wedding was for a good start," I said, my voice calm and clear. "This is a good start. It's a start on taking responsibility for the lives you damage. As for Mark's legal fees, I paused, looking directly at my father, and gave him his own words back, a gift he didn't know he'd given me. You're the parents. You'll figure it out. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, burning into my back, but I just kept walking. I pushed open the door of the coffee shop and stepped out into the bright, cold morning air, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt truly, completely free. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. I had executed the plan. The consequences were no longer my concern. I focused on my own mission, rebuilding my life. I severed the final lines of communication, blocking their numbers and email addresses. I moved, not far, just to a new apartment complex on the other side of town, one they didn't know. It felt like establishing a new, secure forward operating base. Information still trickled in, not because I sought it, but because the world is small. David would occasionally mention things he'd heard through the local grapevine. My parents, he told me, had taken out a second mortgage on their house. The house that had been their monument to suburban success was now a monument to their debt. They sold both of their luxury cars. Ashley and Mark had to move out of their trendy townhouse and into a cramped apartment. Mark, without his high-priced lawyer, had accepted a plea bargain. He was serving an 18-month sentence in a state facility. Ashley, David heard, had sold her engagement ring, the one with the diamond that was supposed to symbolize a perfect beginning. One final piece of communication made it through my firewall. A letter, forwarded from my old address, arrived about 6 months after the coffee shop meeting. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. Inside was a multi-page diatribe filled with blame, fury, and self-pity. It called me a monster, a traitor, cold-hearted, and ungrateful. It detailed their suffering, their humiliation, their financial ruin. There was not a single word about Mark's victim or his crime. I read it once, calmly. Then I folded it neatly, slid it into the project accountability folder, and filed it away. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even the bitter satisfaction of victory, not relief, clarity. The relationship I had mourned was an illusion. The letter was just the final, official confirmation. The case was closed. My own life began to grow in the space their chaos had once occupied. I used the remainder of my payout to lease a small office and officially launch my logistics consulting firm. My first clients were small businesses, overwhelmed by supply chain issues. My military experience translated perfectly. I brought order to their chaos. I helped them build efficient, resilient systems. My business grew, slowly at first, then steadily. My chosen family grew too. My weekly dinners with David and his wife Sarah became a non-negotiable part of my schedule. We'd sit in their warm, cluttered kitchen, talking for hours. They'd ask about my business. I'd ask about their grandkids. They taught me that family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you built. It was showing up. It was listening. It was offering a cup of tea at just the right moment. It was help with no strings attached. About a year after the confrontation, I got an anonymous letter forwarded through Paul's office. It was from the law firm managing the victim's trust. It was a simple, one-page update. The woman Mark had hit was out of the hospital. She was walking again. She was back at work, part-time. Her children were thriving. The letter ended with a simple, powerful sentence. Your gift has provided this family with a future that otherwise would not have been possible. I taped that letter to the wall above my desk. It was my medal, my proof of a mission accomplished. One crisp autumn afternoon, 2 years after that first late-night phone call, I found myself walking through a park near my new office. The leaves were turning, painting the trees in fiery shades of red and gold. I was walking without my cane. I didn't even realize it at first. the pain in my leg had faded to a dull, manageable ache. A quiet reminder of what I had survived, not a constant definition of what held me back. The sun was warm on my face. A group of kids were laughing on the playground nearby. The air was clean and cool. I was standing on my own 2 feet, in a life I had built for myself on my own terms. I was strong, and I was finally at peace. It's been years now. My business is thriving. My life is full. The ache in my leg is just a whisper, a footnote in my story. I sometimes reflect on what it means to be the strong one. For so long, I believed it was my duty to be a shock absorber, to quietly soak up the dysfunction and neglect, to carry whatever weight my family decided to place on my shoulders. I thought my strength was measured by how much I could endure. I was wrong. That isn't strength. It's a form of self-destruction. True strength isn't about how many blows you can take. It's about having the clarity to see the blows are falling, the courage to step out of the way, and the conviction to build a structure that prevents them from falling on you ever again. Strength is not silent endurance. It is the power to set a boundary. I learned that accountability is not the same as revenge. Revenge is about causing pain. Accountability is about restoring balance. I didn't destroy my family. I simply removed the safety net that had allowed them to live without consequences. I let them feel the full weight of their own choices. It wasn't my job to save them from themselves. It was my job to save myself from them. And in doing so, I helped a family I'd never met, and that act of justice healed a part of me I didn't even know was broken. Family, I learned, is not an unbreakable bond of obligation you are born into. It's a standard of conduct people have to meet. Love is not a blank check for exploitation. It's a reciprocal agreement of support, respect, and kindness. They called me the strong one, and they were right, just not in the way they thought. My strength wasn't in my ability to carry their burdens. It was in my ability to finally put them down. Have you ever been the strong one in your family? The person everyone depends on, but no one supports? The one who is expected to give everything and ask for nothing in return? I want to hear about it. Tell me your story in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from. The world can feel like a lonely place when you're finally standing your ground. But I promise you, you are not alone. There are more of us than you think. And if you want to hear more stories about finding strength and drawing your own lines in the sand, make sure you subscribe, because every single one of us deserves a family that lifts us up, not one that is determined to hold us down.